Can you hear me in the back? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the opportunity to visit IIT Gandhinagar again. I've been coming here for several years, and it's so wonderful to see this institution being built, such an excellent institution being built uh, from ground zero up, and to have a chance to meet both its students and scholars who are working here. So thank you, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about markets and artifacts for social prosperity. It's been known for a long time that there are four paths to prosperity: discovery or innovation, production or transformation, exchange, trade or trade, and loot, by stealing or by force. Discovery is obvious. Minerals, discovery of minerals made Arabia rich. Discovery of laws of chemistry made Germany rich early in the late 19th and early 20th century. Inventions of steam engine led to wealth of some of the wealth of United Kingdom. Design of artifacts, methods, processes, these are all discovery and innovation generating wealth. Production and transformation involves manufacturing. Anatolia found ways of making steel a long time ago. Indian cotton textiles, you can find them in Egyptian mummies. Chinese silk, German machinery, building homes, steel structures, bridges, and then of course services, transport, communication, entertainment, all various kinds of production and transformation. Third is exchange and trade. When same things are valued differently by different people, a voluntary exchange at a mutually negotiated price benefits both sides. Some people say there is no free lunch in economics, but this is as free a lunch as you can get. Now, this should not be ringing at this time, but it is. Sorry. And of course, Dutch, as you know, earned their wealth by trading spices to Europe, sugar to Japan, and many other things. And finally, loot. Many people think that's the easiest route to prosperity. Nothing unknown to us. The photograph on the right is a photograph of Secunderabad Palace in Lucknow, taken in 1858, a year after the battle between the British and Nawab's forces in Lucknow. So this photographer dug up the bones from the graves and spread them around to make them look like flesh. And this is probably one of the earliest. What do we call this when you massage a photograph to make it look like something else? This is one of the early examples. And of course, these are the walls of Coricancha in Cusco, Peru. These are granite walls which are still perfectly aligned. It's mortarless construction, except they are bare granite now. When the Spaniards arrived in Peru and arrested the Inca, these walls had been encrusted with thick plates of gold, which of course was shipped. But of course, prosperity by force and stealth does not last. And Spain is not the wealthiest country didn't remain a wealthy country in Europe for a long time. In any case, today, my talk, the focus is on exchange and trade as a source of wealth. The question we're going to address is how do how does exchange and trade generate wealth? How do markets generate wealth? Because they seem to pop up everywhere. If you don't do anything, you'll see markets. Nothing unusual here. And even on this campus, as you will see. Uh, hmm, happened here. I just tested it. Okay. Below there, change something. Anyway, just here we are. Came in. Okay. And in history, you can see trade and exchange everywhere. These are pictures of cuneiform tablets, clay tablets, on which on the left accounts are written from the trade, the lists of things traded. On the right hand side, you see two things. Inside is a tablet, a clay tablet, which has the which has inside is a clay tablet with the information, and outside the clay tablet is an envelope on which the parties have put a seal while the envelope was still wet, so that, and then it was baked, so that nobody can alter the contract in which these guys have entered. Okay. And I couldn't help showing you this tablet. This is the proof of Pythagoras' theorem from about 2000 BC on a clay tablet from Babylon. This tablet is actually in Yale's collection. I can't read but anyway, this is not related to trade. I just wanted to show you. Ancient Egypt, you can see extensive record of trading and exchange. Every civilization in history had extensive exchanges. In fact, Phoenicians and Israelites became excellent ship sailors, and their wealth was accumulated by trading, not by attacking and snatching the wealth of other civilizations. Here's the map of Roman trade routes in the classical Roman times. And this is the other ancient Asian trade routes, both Silk Road up there on land, and then in the on the ocean route, all the way from Far East to China and to India and to the West. Uh, I couldn't help talking about Arthashastra. Arthashastra was written in the late 4th century BC, and uh, as you know, he was Kautilya was the advisor to and mentor of Chandragupta Maurya, uh, and Arthashastra has very extensive uh, treatment of trading and how the king has to regulate trading. He talks about an office called Director of Marketplace. When you look at the functions of the Director of Marketplace, it almost reads the charge given to U.S. Federal Trade Commission and Consumer Protection Agency. You can read through this. Protect consumers from irresponsible traders, inspect weights and measures, prevent stolen goods from being sold, sample goods to ensure the quality and mislabeling, prevent sales of adulterated foods and medicines, prevent collusion among traders to raise prices, nothing new in Ahmedabad, ensure that goods are sold at fixed prices at a profit margin that does not exceed 5%, balance the interests of traders by providing exemptions and assistance when goods are damaged by unforeseeable circumstances. The schedule of duty on incoming goods by various categories was specified in Arthashastra, and no sale of commodities allowed at the place of origin, because then the king would not be able to collect taxes. Director of Trade fixed the price. Profit of 10% permitted on imported goods. Remember, that's more than 5% on the domestic goods. Stockpiling to raise price above level fixed by state was prohibited. And in case of glut, the Director of Trade was supposed to purchase the goods and sell them in a systematic fashion, so the producers will not be punished for the glut. And encourage import of foreign goods if not available locally. There was provisions for state trading. To manage the state trading, there was a chief controller of state trading, and his functions are given here on this sheet. I won't read through them. And there was extensive provision of foreign trade. Kautilya was not a mercantilist. He encouraged foreign trade because he argued that foreign trade is good for the people. And very important here, if you look at the fourth point here, be impartial in disputes between foreign and native merchants. He's asking the king and the officers not to be partial to the domestic merchants when there's a dispute. Because, of course, if you are partial towards domestic merchants, foreign merchants will not come, and it will be your loss, he argues. He makes very strong advocacy of free trade. Foreign trade is desirable for supply of goods that may not be available indigenously, and suggests prosperity. I mean, it almost reads like Milton Friedman when you read this chapter on foreign trade. Control of foreign trade, he has extensive treatment of how to control foreign trade. And if you look at this cost for protecting the goods, whether traveling by land or sea, that sounds like provision for insurance of goods when they are in transit. Okay. In some circumstances, trade might occur at a loss, and look at the last bullet point here. To evade duties, traders may show lower prices or inferior samples, need vigilant officers and penalties to discourage such behavior. Does this sound new or old? Okay. All right. One more thing on history. Why are the cities on water so prosperous? Of course, in one word, it amounts to trade. It's much easier to trade. Transport goods on water, it was much cheaper for a long time. And most major cities of the world Certainly the most prosperous ones are on water, either on ocean or on rivers. And so the question we want to ask now is, how do markets create prosperity? And basically it's a two-part answer that I'm going to talk about. One is surplus extraction, and I'll explain what that means. And second, information dissemination and aggregation. And we'll look at both these functions and examine the enabling functions of markets that lie behind surplus extraction and information dissemination and aggregation. So let's start with information. Okay, the fundamental question, fundamental problem in society is not that we do not choose the best action when acting by intuition or by deliberation. The problem is, what can we do and what do we actually do to achieve efficient outcomes? Obviously, we are talking economics, not life in general. Managing and minimizing the harmful consequences of our personal cognitive limitations. So human society has devised and continues to devise social mechanisms or social artifacts to address this problem, how to solve these complex problems in spite of our cognitive limitations as individuals. And one of these, most relevant to this lecture, is the price system or the market system. It can aggregate and disseminate information dispersed among millions so that they and the society benefit from it, as opposed to central planning. Because central planning cannot help, because it cannot access dispersed information. Because when the information is dispersed in the population, which is almost always the case, the central government, central planner cannot find out that information because people will not tell them the truth. And so the question we are going to try to answer is, how is the price system, the market system, able to produce a rational order in spite of its imperfections and limitations of irrational individuals who participate in it? So that's a question we are going to try to address. And here I should quote at some length Friedrich Hayek, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist from Austria. If I may read this paragraph: civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. This is of profound significance in the social field. We make constant use of formulas, symbols, and rules whose meaning we do not understand, and through the use of which we avail ourselves of the assistance of knowledge which individually we do not possess. We have developed these practices and institutions by building upon habits and institutions which have proved successful in their own sphere, which have in turn become the foundations of civilizations we have built up. He wrote this in 1945. He was a lifelong opponent of central planning. Of course, 1930s and 40s were the days when central planning was very much in vogue. After 20 or 30, 25 years after Bolshevik Revolution, everybody thought central planning is the way to go. He opposed that. He had extensive debates with Abba Lerner and other proponents of central planning, and he was essentially ignored. He was completely ignored and basically thrown out. No. And then, 30 years later, people realized that he was right. So just because people don't approve doesn't mean you're not right, at least in academia. Chances are, if you have a good idea, it may not be within your life that will be appreciated. In his case, it was appreciated within his life, and he did live about 30 years after that. In any case, let's talk about three approaches to society's economic problem. One is the rational individual approach of Paul Samuelson and Robert Lucas and other economists. Second is a limited cognition approach of Herbert Simon and Tversky and Kahneman. And third is the one I'm going to talk about, that dispersed information combined with minimal intelligence can generate rational order. That's the argument I'm going to make in the third part. So let's start with this. First, what do we mean by rational order? Well, I just mean efficient use of resources in society. It should be easy for us to gather and combine all the information from everybody in the society in one mind, in the hands of one person, and then use it rationally to arrive at decisions and outcomes. And rational and efficient order arising from rational individual behavior with access to all information. That's the central planning model. What's the problem? The problem that Hayek points out that each of these three steps has serious problems. One, information is dispersed, as I said earlier, widely, and there's no way of getting people to reliably share the information they have with a single mind of the decision maker or central planner. And second, when guided by intuition alone, individual behavior often deviates from the rational. We know that from cognitive science. And so this limited cognition, a critique of which Herbert Simon, my own teacher at Carnegie Mellon, was one of the very early proponents. He pointed out that humans are endowed with limited and imperfect cognitive resources, and they argue that this limited human cognition, bounded rationality, and they use bounded rationality and satisficing criteria instead of maximization. And they identified means and heuristic that I will not go into right now as the way people actually behave. It's kind of adaptive behavior. So derivation of rational order from rational behavior neglects the problem of limited cognition, they pointed out. And therefore, that derivation, the standard derivation that Marshall, Paul Samuelson, and others had standard practice in economics, they said, since people cannot optimize any results in economics that you derive from assuming that people optimize are not credible. That's it. Okay. All right. So what's the third alternative? Limited cognition is not the only problem. No one mind has all information. It's dispersed, as we said earlier. Rational order can emerge, as has been pointed out very well, can emerge from interactions among individuals with limited cognition and limited information. Okay. The derivation of the optimal at aggregate level is not necessary from optimal behavior by individuals. So evolution of social mechanisms such as the price system, markets, is an example of such evolution, and there are, of course, other social systems. So let me focus my attention on this third approach. Okay. This third approach is nothing new in the 21st century or 20th century. If you go back to the days of Scottish Enlightenment, you'll see Bernard Mandeville, David Hume, Adam Ferguson, Adam Smith, they argued that what we see is the result of human action, but not execution of any human design. Smith wrote, he intends only his own gain, and he is, in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. And I'll show you some results recent results that show how this whole mechanism that Adam Smith was talking about works. Okay. And that will apply, though we'll talk about only markets today, that can apply to a variety of social institutions, such as regulation, elections, hierarchy, villages, and schools. I don't need to tell you any more about complex systems, but the idea of complex systems which involve feedback, spontaneous order, stability and robustness in emergent properties is critical to what I'm going to talk about. So alternative approaches to study of the properties of complex systems have been proposed, and I'm going to use basically computer simulation, okay, by using very simple artificial agents. All right, so first, remember we talked about dissemination of information and extraction of surplus. Let's start with dissemination of information. In our paper, Charlie Plott of Caltech and myself in 1982, we showed that in a simple auction, double auction, security markets in laboratory, the information provided to only some of the traders gets disseminated through the market mechanism to others who have not been provided that information. And the market outcomes consistent with the rational order dominate the outcomes consistent with no dissemination of information. And this was the first evidence of efficiency of markets from controlled experimentations. I won't go into the details of this figure, but this is the data which shows, especially if you look at it. This dotted line is the prediction of the theory that there is no dissemination of information. And this line here, I don't know if you can see that. This line shows no dissemination. This line is lower line of the dissemination, and data is much closer to the dissemination theory than no dissemination theory. Okay. I won't go into further detail of this. And then we examined in another paper a few years later whether markets can aggregate dispersed and diverse information. Different people know different things. Can market put it all together as if everybody knows everything? Simply through the trading system. And again, we found that under certain conditions, I won't go into the details of this because it will take too much time, that complete markets can aggregate and disseminate diverse information, and such markets can achieve high information and allocative efficiency. The same happens when investors have homogeneous preferences. Aggregation does not occur in incomplete markets. So it depends on the market environment and the market design whether information is aggregated by the markets or not. All right, but how does this aggregation take place? We know that aggregation takes place, and the Hayek's conjecture proved to be true. But how does this happen? We still don't know that actually. So far, we have examined the markets populated by profit-motivated human subjects. And these human beings bring their own faculties to the lab. An experimenter has no control over them. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about computer simulations in which you can control what the computerized artificial agents are going to do. Okay. But before I go to simulations, I want to mention a couple of other important results from economic history. Gary Becker, who was also a Nobel laureate in economics, he showed that the downward sloping demand functions, can be derived by purely random behavior, simply because of the budget constraint. Okay. Downward sloping demand function does not mean that people are optimizing. Even if consumers are not optimizers, you will get downward sloping demand functions. Similarly, you'll get upward sloping supply functions, even if the suppliers are not optimizing. And a second paper I want to mention is by Vernon L Smith. Both these papers were published actually in the same issue of Journal of Political Economy in 1982 and 62. And he conducted a double auction. So if I may just point out, he conducted a classroom market with about 10 to 20 traders. Here the demand function, here the supply function. They intersected at $2. So theoretical equilibrium price was $2. And he let these people trade, these students in the market trade with each other. And some of you who were in my class will remember, you saw them trading with each other. And what happens? Prices came very close to the theoretical equilibrium, even though each of these individuals had just one piece of information. What is their value or what is their cost? They didn't have all the data to optimize it. And yet individuals acting on the basis of their own personal private information, trying to make money, resulted in an outcome which was not only the prices were very close to the theoretical equilibrium, so was the trading volume, but in addition, in a market, this shaded area under the demand function and above the supply function, this shaded area, this area defines the maximum possible profit that all traders together can make by any conceivable combination of transactions. There's no way for them to make more money than this area. And how much money did they make? In aggregate, they made about 99% of the maximum possible. They were each trying to make money for themselves, but they ended up making the maximum amount for the group as a whole. Individuals can make maximum for themselves, but as a whole, they did. Okay? And that's basically Adam Smith's proposition that I read out to you earlier. So this market was able to extract all the surplus. That was the first item I talked about a little earlier. But Vernon Smith's students were motivated by profits. What Dhananjay Bode and myself did some 20 years later was to combine the ideas of Vernon Smith and Gary Becker and conducted another market. Okay, first I'm going to show you a market in which the students are trading with each other. This is not right. Sorry. Okay. First, I'm going to show you the market in which students are trading with each other. And you see the transaction prices here. The theoretical transaction price should be between 82 and 86. And you can see the prices are very close to the theoretical equilibrium that the economic theory would predict. These are bids and offers on the top. This is a ticker tape, and you can see how this is the end of one period of trading, another period starts, but prices are very stable and almost at the MBA students in my class at Carnegie Mellon University in 1989. Then let me show you a second market. Oh, okay, now I know how to do it. Okay. You see what's happening here? I was teaching this course in program trading. So after the students learned to trade on keyboard, buying and selling on keyboard, I said, okay, we had developed a higher level language and a system to provide all this data to them in data arrays. And they had to write programs to replace themselves, to trade in real time. As each bid and offer came in, the program has to react to every bid and offer and decide whether to make a bid and offer or transaction itself. So these are six buyer programs and six seller programs written by students. And at the very beginning, you must have seen there was a straight line going up, and this was somebody who had written a program and said, bid 1, bid 2, bid 3, bid 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it kept like, in any case, you can see here that these programs written by students have many more bids and offers per transaction. And as you will see, the prices started not at 80, but about 100. But by the end of the period, they came down to about 80. And here, second period, prices are a little bit more volatile, but they are just about 80 or slightly above. So nothing surprising here. These are artificially intelligent agents. This was the market run in '89, where AI agents are trading against each other. You can see here, if I stop this here, these are the last millisecond strategies where people are kind of trying to take advantage of what happens in the very last fraction of a second. In any case, let me show you a third market. Let me stop this. Let me go. Keep going. Sorry. Okay. What do you see happening here? These are what I call zero intelligence agents. Zero intelligence agents are the buyers have a value and they pick a random number between the value and zero. Uniformly distributed random number, submit that as a bid. That means if that bid is accepted, they can't lose money. Sellers, if they have this cost, they pick a random, uniformly distributed random number between their cost and the arbitrary upper limit of 200. Submit that as an ask. And if the bid and ask cross, there's a transaction. The convergence of bids and asks and the transaction, with transactions, prices have much greater variation. But look what happens towards the end of the period. The prices converge to the same theoretical equilibrium, predicted equilibrium. Plus, what we discovered at the end was that these markets also were about 99% efficient. So it turned out that what Vernon Smith had shown, that human traders looking for profit will generate 100% or 99% surplus extraction, but these zero intelligence markets also extract 99% surplus. So it turned out that extraction properties, surplus extraction properties of the market have nothing to do with the individual intelligence. Individual intelligence will determine the distribution of profit, but not the total profit. For the society, for the market as a whole, what matters is the rules of the market and not the intelligence of individual people. The overall efficiency of these markets is extremely robust. As you can see here, there's a human behavior in the bottom panel. This is unconstrained bidding, and if you put the budget constraint, if you don't buy above your value, don't sell below your cost, you get something like this. What did we learn from this? So in a simple double auction with no uncertainty, zero intelligence subjects who act randomly, subject to no loss constraint, can generate rational order, extract almost 100% surplus and near equilibrium prices and allocations. Okay? And same thing has been replicated in a whole bunch of other studies we have done since that time that we are not going to go into. Okay. Well, we don't need, but don't we need human intelligence to handle uncertainty? Maybe. Let's find out. We did a subsequent study. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but just very quickly show you. Here's a human behavior under uncertainty. The same market that I showed you earlier, Vernon Sunder, 1982. Okay, here's a minimally intelligent market. Red line is the minimally intelligent market. Even in the case of uncertainty, the relationship between minimally intelligent markets and human behavior is surprisingly close, but depends on your judgment. Okay. All right. There are, of course, many ways of organizing markets. There are private or common value auctions, one-sided or two-sided markets, sealed and open auctions, first price, second price auctions, discriminating uniform price auctions, Dutch, English auctions, double auctions, so on and so forth. I won't go into details of all these types of auctions, but as you know, there are many, many different ways of organizing markets, and each of these markets have their own properties. We have talked about efficiency, but there are a lot of other properties that experimentalists and economists study. Okay. But what we found is that the source of efficiency of markets is the rules of the market. And here are the rules that determine the efficiency. Freedom to accept or reject trading proposals, binding contracts. If you don't have binding contracts, there's no efficiency. Price priority, higher bid and lower ask should get a priority over others. Accumulation of unaccepted bids and offers. Double options, both sides can actively propose trades. Repeated bids and offers, and public bids and offers with improvement rule. These are the features of the market that determine the ability to be efficient. And ability to be efficient means generation of prosperity. Okay. Rational order, as I mentioned earlier, is very closely connected to ideas of complexity theory. That's Professor Fonseca is teaching a course right now, which I had a pleasure of attending, at least the first session. So if you are interested in complexity theory, I hope you will attend his class. It's a wonderful, wonderful lesson. That properties of the components of the system are not necessarily shared by the properties of the system in aggregate. So this is the third box that I talked about, and but there's an important caveat before I end this talk. We have only talked about private goods in competitive markets so far. I'm not going to talk about public goods, but there are important situations in which pursuit of private self-interest in markets does not lead to desirable outcomes. What are the examples of that? When is it that markets don't work? I don't want anybody in this room to leave the room saying, oh, Shyam Sunder said, oh, markets are wonderful. Yes, they are wonderful for many situations, but not all situations. For public goods are defined as things from which you cannot exclude the non-payers. You cannot exclude those guys from benefiting from it, and which has zero marginal cost. Clean air is a public good. Okay, radio signal, television broadcast signal of TV is a public good. National defense is a public good. Monopoly, monopsony, information asymmetry case, these are the cases in which markets tend to fail. It will be unwise to assume that properties of competitive markets for private goods extend to public goods or non-competitive markets, because they don't. I don't have to tell you that, because you know that already, right? Does it work in environment? Individual pursuit of private interest doesn't work. You can barely see India Gate in Delhi. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Okay? So there are plenty of examples where this is not going to work. Okay? Uh, Anytime you have public goods, monopoly, monopsony. Okay? So we need non-market solutions for these situations. And to examine efficient production of public goods, even though that's not the subject matter of this talk, I'll be glad to talk about it at another session. Efficient solution for production of public goods was also discovered a long time ago. It's called bureaucracy. Because efficient production of public goods is a very difficult problem. And bureaucracy is the best solution we have found so far. It's imperfect, yes, but there's nothing better that anybody has discovered so far. Again, let me go back to Kautilya. Kautilya writes, just as it's difficult to know if a swimming fish is drinking water, it's difficult to detect if officers appointed for carrying out works steal king's wealth. I can't tell if the fish is drinking water or not. That's a difficult problem of producing public goods. In any case, there's a long tradition in sciences of beautiful experiments. As many of you already know much better than I do, that after Crick and Watson's discovery of double helix, there was a scientific race to decode how RNA translated DNA information to synthesize amino acids. It was a hopelessly complex problem until Nirenberg tried a breathtakingly simple test. He put together an RNA sequence which was U. This doesn't exist in nature. And said, suppose this is the one we use. What would be the result? The result was phenylamine, and the code was soon decided by this strategy. And each of the 64 codons consisting of 3 letters produced one of the 20 amino acids. So there are other masters of beautiful experiments in biology, and you know enough names of that. I won't tell you. Economics is just starting down this path of experimentation to design experiments so we can discover what is it that really matters. Is it human intelligence that matters or market rules that matter? And in this case, we discovered that it's market rules. So let me back. Markets are artifacts of social prosperity. Technology, after all, we are in the Indian Institute of Technology. We design and improve artifacts to improve our lives. Artifacts can be physical, which is what we think about most of the time, but artifacts can also be social. And market is a social artifact. And these social artifacts are not visible, they are invisible. Our standard of living depends on both, not just physical artifacts, but also social artifacts. Life will be hard without either of them. Imagine living in the world with no exchange, what we call autarky. If I had to live entirely on the basis of what I make and produce and gather and collect and steal and snatch, what would be my standard of living? I couldn't produce food, I couldn't produce these clothes, I certainly could not produce this. I don't know about you guys. I think most of us would still be living in trees, right? If that. So designing and improving rules of market, enforcing them, and living within their boundaries is critical to the prosperity of society, independent of time and space. Everywhere, all the time through history, that has been true. I just saw in the newspaper, day before yesterday, government suspects GST leakage by SME scheme. Somebody has found ways of violating the market rules. Unless we fix them any contribution of GST to our prosperity would be seriously undermined. Thank you.